The hearing room on Capitol Hill was packed that Thursday morning, camera crews positioned along every wall, reporters filling the press gallery 3 rows deep. Congressman Jim Jordan sat at the center of the dais, leaning back in his chair with the particular posture of a man who believed he had already won the day before it began. He had spent the previous 48 hours on every cable news network willing to book him, using words like witch hunt and political theater, with the casual fluency of someone who had said them so many times they had become reflex rather than argument. His jacket was off, his sleeves rolled to the elbows in what his media team had long ago determined projected working-class credibility to viewers in Ohio. He was holding a printed timeline in his left hand, occasionally tapping it against the desk for emphasis even though no one had asked him a question yet. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat 4 seats down from the chairman's position, her posture perfectly upright, her hands resting flat on the desk in front of her with the stillness of someone who had learned long ago that composure was a weapon more powerful than volume. She wore a navy suit with a crisp white collar, her hair pulled back in a way that made her face completely visible to every camera in the room. In front of her sat a single manila folder, unremarkable in appearance, the kind of folder that could contain anything from meeting notes to a mortgage application. She had not opened it yet, she had not touched it. She had simply placed it on the desk when she sat down 20 minutes earlier, aligned it precisely parallel to the edge of the table, and left it there. Something about the deliberateness of that alignment had drawn Jordan's attention twice already, though he had said nothing about it. Jordan cleared his throat and leaned forward toward his microphone, not waiting for the chairman to formally open the proceedings. He had a habit of speaking before being recognized, a behavioral pattern that 16 months of congressional hearings had documented in granular detail, though no one had yet compiled those instances into a single presentation. His voice carried the particular tone of a prosecutor who believes the verdict has already been decided in his favor. "I think what we're seeing here today is exactly what the American people are tired of," he began, gesturing broadly toward the minority side of the chamber. "We've got representatives who spend more time on cable news than they do reading the bills they vote on, who get elected based on viral tweets instead of actual legislative accomplishment, and who think a law degree from a state school makes them qualified to question career prosecutors and investigators who've been doing this work since before some of these folks were born." He was not looking at Crockett when he said it, but the phrasing made the target unmistakable. She had graduated from Howard Law, clerked for a federal judge, and spent 6 years as a civil rights attorney before running for office, but Jordan had developed a rhetorical technique of acknowledging credentials while simultaneously dismissing them as inferior to an undefined standard he himself had never met. He shifted in his chair, settling deeper into the performance. "And frankly, I find it offensive that we're being lectured about ethics and accountability by people who wouldn't know the first thing about running a real investigation if their political careers depended on it, which fortunately for them they don't, because their districts are so safe they could read the phone book on the House floor and still get reelected." A few scattered chuckles came from the Republican side of the chamber. Jordan smiled, pleased with the reaction, and continued. "So when I hear talk about obstruction or cover-ups or any of the other buzzwords that poll well with the resistance base, what I actually hear is people who don't understand how oversight works, who've never had to make a prosecutorial decision in their lives, trying to score political points by second-guessing professionals." He placed the timeline down on the desk with a decisive tap. "That's not oversight. That's not governance. That's just noise." Crockett's expression had not changed. She had not reached for her microphone. She had not shifted position. Her hands remained flat on the desk, her gaze steady on Jordan, her face showing neither anger nor offense nor any of the emotional responses that his language had been carefully designed to provoke. The only movement she made was to glance down briefly at the manila folder in front of her, a glance that lasted perhaps 2 seconds, and then return her attention to Jordan. Something in that glance made one of the reporters in the press gallery lean forward slightly, though he would not have been able to explain why. Jordan was warming to his theme now, his voice rising slightly in volume, his gestures becoming broader. "And let me be very clear about something, because I think it's important for the record and for the millions of Americans watching this hearing. The investigation into the events of January 6th has been thorough, it has been professional, and it has been conducted by people with decades of experience in federal law enforcement and prosecutorial work, people who know what they're doing, people who understand the law." He paused for effect, letting the implication hang in the air. "So when someone with 3 years in Congress and a Twitter following decides they know better than career professionals, forgive me if I don't take that particularly seriously." The chairman, looking increasingly uncomfortable with Jordan's extended opening statement, finally tapped his gavel once. The gentleman's time for opening remarks has expired. We'll now proceed to questioning. Jordan waved a hand dismissively. I'm just establishing context, Mr. Chairman. The context is established. Representative Crockett, you have 5 minutes. Crockett reached for her microphone with the same measured precision she had used to place the folder on the desk. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost gentle, the kind of tone a teacher might use when asking a student to reconsider an answer they knew was wrong but wanted them to discover the error themselves. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congressman Jordan, I appreciate your thorough opening statement about professional qualifications and investigative experience. I'd like to ask you about an email. Jordan's face showed the first flicker of something that was not complete confidence. It passed quickly, replaced by an expression of performative patience. I've answered thousands of questions about thousands of emails, Representative. You're going to have to be more specific. Of course. She opened the folder. The movement was unhurried, almost reverent, as though she were handling something fragile. Inside were perhaps 20 pages printed on standard white paper, each page marked with a yellow tab extending from the right edge. She removed the first page and held it up so the cameras could see it, though at this distance no one could read the text. This is an email sent from your official congressional account on January 5, 2021, at 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time. The recipient was Mark Meadows. The subject line was VP Strategy Clarification. Do you recall sending this email? Jordan's jaw tightened slightly. I send hundreds of emails a day, Representative. I can't be expected to remember every single one. That's understandable. Her voice remained gentle. Let me refresh your memory. In this email you wrote, and I'm quoting directly from the text that was recovered from the National Archives under federal subpoena, VP needs to understand he has more flexibility than he thinks. Precedent isn't as binding as legal counsel is telling him. We've got the numbers on our side if he's willing to use the authority. End quote. She placed the page down on the desk in front of her, aligned it with the same precision she had aligned the folder, and looked up at Jordan. Does that refresh your memory about this particular email? The room had gone very quiet. Jordan's hand moved toward his water glass, a small tell that would be analyzed frame by frame on cable news later that evening. I'd have to see the full context of the email chain to comment on any individual message. Of course you would. She removed a second page from the folder. This is the email you received 3 hours earlier from Mark Meadows, the email you were responding to. He wrote, Legal team advising VP that certification role is purely ministerial, no discretion to reject or return, looking for any constitutional arguments to the contrary. And your response was the email I just read. Would you say that your response was providing him with what he asked for? Constitutional arguments to support rejecting the legal team's advice? Jordan leaned back in his chair, his earlier confident posture now replaced with something more defensive. Representative, this is taking a single email exchange completely out of context. There were ongoing discussions about a wide range of constitutional questions related to the electoral process. That's normal and appropriate. I agree that constitutional discussions are appropriate. Her tone had not changed at all, had not become sharper or more aggressive, remained the same measured gentleness that somehow made every word land with greater force than shouting could have achieved. So let me make sure I understand your position. You're saying that when you told the White House Chief of Staff that the Vice President had more flexibility than he thinks regarding his certification role, you were engaging in a normal constitutional discussion, not providing advice on how to circumvent the legal counsel's determination that he had no such flexibility? I was providing my analysis of historical precedent and constitutional scholarship. Your analysis. She removed a third page from the folder. Congressman Jordan, what is your educational background in constitutional law? His face reddened slightly. I have a law degree from Capital University. And did you take constitutional law courses there? Of course. How many? I'd have to check my transcripts. I can help with that. According to your official biography on your congressional website, you took 2 constitutional law courses during your law degree, one in your second year and one in your third year. Is that accurate? If that's what the biography says. And after law school, did you practice constitutional law? I practiced law, period. I represented clients in state court. What type of cases? Jordan's voice was rising now, the patient tone from earlier completely gone. Representative, I don't see how my personal resume is relevant to this hearing. You made it relevant about 4 minutes ago when you spent several minutes questioning my qualifications and suggesting that career experience should determine whose analysis we trust. I'm simply establishing what career experience we should be trusting here. Her hands remained flat on the desk. Her voice remained exactly as calm as it had been from her first word. So let me ask again, what type of law did you practice? General litigation, some criminal defense. Constitutional law? Constitutional issues arise in many types of cases. That's not what I asked. Did you specialize in constitutional law? Did you argue constitutional questions before federal courts? Did you clerk for a constitutional law scholar or a federal judge whose docket included constitutional questions? The silence that followed was not long, perhaps 5 seconds, but it was absolute. Jordan's face had gone from red to a deeper shade that suggested something beyond embarrassment. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight. No, thank you for that clarification. She removed a 4th page from the folder. This is the resume of Vice President Pence's legal counsel at the time, the person whose advice you suggested the Vice President should disregard. He clerked for Justice Scalia, taught constitutional law at 3 universities, and argued 14 cases before the Supreme Court. Would you say your constitutional analysis, based on 2 law school courses and general litigation practice in state court, was more authoritative than his? I was providing a political perspective, not a legal one. That's interesting because your email specifically uses the words precedent, legal counsel, and authority, all of which are legal terms, not political ones. And you sent this email to the White House Chief of Staff less than 12 hours before Congress was scheduled to certify the electoral votes, at a time when the Vice President was actively seeking legal guidance on his role. So either you were providing legal advice you weren't qualified to give, or you were deliberately trying to create political pressure to ignore the legal advice from someone who was qualified. Which was it? Jordan's hand gripped the edge of the desk. I reject the premise of that question entirely. You don't have to accept the premise. You just have to answer which one it was. Her voice was still gentle, still measured, still carrying not a trace of anger or triumph or satisfaction. Were you providing unqualified legal advice, or were you creating political pressure to ignore qualified legal advice? I was doing neither. I was participating in ongoing discussions about constitutional questions that reasonable people can disagree about. She removed a 5th page from the folder. This is an email you sent to Congressman Biggs 4 hours after your email to Mark Meadows. In it, you wrote, "Talk to WH. They're on board with flexibility argument. VP still nervous, but Meadows is working him." Does that sound like participating in an academic discussion about constitutional questions, or does that sound like you were coordinating a strategy to pressure the Vice President to take an action his lawyers told him was illegal? The room had gone completely still. The typing in the press gallery had stopped. The chairman was leaning forward in his seat, his hand near the gavel but not touching it. Jordan's face had gone from deep red to a pale color that suggested the blood had drained from it entirely. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. 10 seconds, 15, 19. The only sound in the hearing room was the ventilation system, a low mechanical hum that no one had noticed until the silence made it the loudest thing in the space. Jordan's eyes moved from Crockett to the folder in front of her, to the pages she had already removed and placed in a neat stack on the desk, to the pages still visible inside the folder with their yellow tabs marking additional sections. His hand had moved from gripping the desk to gripping the arm of his chair. Someone in the press gallery coughed once, a sharp sound that made several people flinch. Finally, Jordan found his voice. It came out rough, strained, nothing like the confident prosecution tone from his opening statement. That email is being taken out of context. Then provide the context. Her hands had not moved from the desk. Her posture had not changed. She was still, completely still, while Jordan was shifting in his chair like a man trying to find a position that didn't hurt. Explain to this committee and to the American people watching what context makes VP still nervous, but Meadows is working him into something other than a description of pressuring the Vice President to ignore his lawyers. I can't speak to every word choice in every informal email I sent during a very intense political period. These weren't informal emails. These were communications sent from your official congressional account to the White House Chief of Staff and to other members of Congress about the constitutional process for certifying a presidential election. There is nothing informal about that. She paused, let the silence extend for 3 seconds, then continued. You used the phrase, working him. What did you mean by that? I meant that discussions were ongoing. Discussions about what? About his role in the certification process. Discussions aimed at convincing him to do what? Jordan's voice rose sharply. Representative, You're trying to turn ordinary political communication into some kind of conspiracy, and it's frankly insulting to everyone who was involved in good faith discussions about constitutional questions. Congressman, I haven't used the word conspiracy. You did. I'm simply asking you to explain your own words in your own emails sent from your own account. Her voice dropped even quieter, forcing everyone in the room to lean in slightly to hear her. Let me ask you a different question. On January 6, 2021, at approximately 2:24 p.m., you sent an email to Mark Meadows. Do you remember what you wrote in that email? Jordan's face went completely blank. No. She removed another page from the folder. You wrote, "POTUS needs to call them off. This is out of control. Someone is going to get killed." Do you remember writing that? The silence that followed was different from the previous silences. This one carried weight. The kind of weight that comes when a truth has been spoken that cannot be taken back. Jordan's hands were both gripping the arms of his chair now. His breathing was visible, his chest rising and falling in a way that suggested he was working to control it. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't recall the specific wording. But you don't deny writing it? I sent many messages that day expressing concern about the violence. I'm sure you did. That's actually admirable. You saw that the situation was dangerous, that people were going to get hurt, and you tried to stop it. That speaks well of you. Her tone had not changed, but something in it had deepened, had acquired a quality of genuine seriousness that made it clear this was not mockery. But here's what I'm trying to understand. You sent that email at 2:24 p.m. The certification process that you had spent the previous 12 hours trying to disrupt, the process where you told the White House Chief of Staff that the Vice President had flexibility he didn't actually have, the process where you coordinated with other members about working the Vice President to ignore his lawyers, that process was the reason those people were in the Capitol in the first place. They believed the election could still be overturned during certification. And when the Vice President refused to do what you and others had been pressuring him to do, they attacked the building. So my question is simple. At what point between 11:47 p.m. on January 5th, when you were telling Meadows the VP had more flexibility than he thought, and 2:24 p.m. on January 6th, when you were begging for someone to call off the crowd, did you realize that the pressure campaign you were part of was going to lead to violence? Jordan stood up. The movement was abrupt, his chair rolling backward from the force of it. His face was pale except for 2 spots of red high on his cheeks. His hands were shaking visibly. I do not have to sit here and be accused of inciting violence by someone who wasn't even in Congress on January 6th and has spent the last 2 years grandstanding on cable news instead of doing any actual legislative work. Congressman, please retake your seat. The chairman's voice was firm. I'm not going to sit here and listen to this character assassination. Crockett had not moved, had not stood, had not raised her voice. She simply sat there, her hands still flat on the desk, her folder still open in front of her, and waited. The cameras had all turned to Jordan, capturing his face, his posture, his shaking hands, the way his mouth was working, but no more words were coming out. Then she spoke, and her voice cut through the chaos with perfect clarity. Congressman Jordan, I haven't accused you of anything. I've asked you to explain your own words in your own emails about your own actions. If those explanations sound like accusations, perhaps you should consider why that is. Jordan ripped the microphone pack from his belt with enough force that the wire pulled free from the transmitter. The electronic squeal that resulted made half the room wince. He dropped the equipment on the desk, turned without another word, and walked toward the exit. The cameras followed him all the way to the door, capturing every step, every jerky movement, the way his hand fumbled twice with the door handle before he got it open. The door closed behind him with a hollow thud that seemed too quiet for the moment it marked. The hearing room remained silent for a long moment after he left. Crockett closed the folder with the same care she had opened it, aligned it precisely with the edge of the desk, and then looked up at the chairman. Mr. Chairman, I believe I still have 90 seconds remaining in my time. The chairman, who appeared to be struggling to process what had just happened, nodded slowly. You do, Representative. I yield back. I think the record speaks for itself. In the press gallery, 16 reporters were already typing, their fingers moving across keyboards in a rhythm that sounded like rain on a metal roof. The video would be uploaded to YouTube within 20 minutes, would have 400,000 views within the first hour, would be shared across Facebook and WhatsApp and every social media platform that existed by people who had spent years waiting to see someone with evidence confront someone with power and watch the evidence win. But in that moment, in the hearing room itself, There was only the sound of Crockett gathering her materials with perfect composure, the empty chair where Jordan had been sitting, and the manila folder that had contained not just emails but the complete unraveling of a narrative that had seemed impenetrable until someone finally asked the right questions in the right order with the right receipts. 3 hours later, a congressional aide would find Jordan in his office, sitting in the dark, staring at his computer screen where the video of the hearing was already playing on loop across every major news website. He would not speak to staff for the rest of the day. He would cancel his scheduled Fox News appearance that evening, the first time in 7 years he had canceled a cable news booking. His office would release a statement at 6:15 p.m. claiming he had walked out because the hearing had become a partisan circus, but the statement would be met with immediate mockery on social media where the video clips of his silence, his shaking hands, his inability to answer the simplest direct questions about his own emails had already been watched by millions.